In 1957, a man from Sumter, South Carolina, sat down to breakfast in the home of a white family in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, where he had taken a job driving for the household. The wife set down a bowl of cold cereal, a glass of orange juice, and 2 pieces of white toast. The man looked at the table for a long moment. Back home, breakfast was fried fish and grits at 5 in the morning, cooked by his mother on a wood stove before the whole family walked out to the field. He ate the cereal. He said thank you, and that night he wrote his sister a letter with one line in it that his family still repeats 70 years later. He wrote, "These people eat breakfast like the stove is broken." He was not being unkind. He was noticing something real. 2 American tables, sitting a few hundred miles apart, had built 2 completely different mornings, and almost nobody has ever explained why. Number 21 on this list is a breakfast grain that one group ate every morning for 200 years while the other group barely knew it existed. Number 3 is the reason none of these traditions were ever written down. And number 1 is not a food at all. It is the single thing that decided what went on both tables before anyone ever struck a match under a skillet. Hit that subscribe button. Here are the 25 old-school breakfast traditions nobody explains. Number 25. The hot breakfast rule. In the black Southern home, breakfast was hot, or it was not breakfast. The stove was lit before the sun came up and something was frying, baking, or simmering on it every single morning. Cold food in the morning was for people who had no one to cook for them. Meanwhile, mainstream America was moving the opposite direction. By the 1950s, the white suburban breakfast was built around the cereal box, the toaster, and speed. A grandmother in Eufaula, Alabama visited her son in Chicago in 1962, opened his cabinet, saw 4 boxes of cereal, and asked him if he had been sick. Number 24. Grits versus oatmeal. Below the grits line, that invisible border running across the Carolinas and down through Texas, ground corn ruled the morning. Stone-ground grits from the local mill, cooked slow with butter and salt, sometimes with cheese, sometimes with fish laid right on top. Above that line, the morning grain was oatmeal or cream of wheat. Same idea. A hot porridge to start a working day. Completely different plant. Completely different history. Grits came out of corn country and out of Native American cooking that black Southern kitchens carried forward. A man from Valdosta, Georgia, who moved north said the first time he ordered grits in a Pennsylvania diner, the waitress brought him cream of wheat and could not understand the problem. Number 23. Fish for breakfast. Fried whiting, croaker, or catfish next to a pile of grits was a normal Tuesday morning in coastal Georgia and the Carolina Lowcountry. The fish came out of the creek or off the dock, hours old, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in a black skillet. In the mainstream American breakfast, fish in the morning was almost unthinkable. Eggs, yes. Bacon, yes. Fish belonged to dinner. But in a fishing and farming culture where protein came from the water for free, the morning fish fry was one of the oldest traditions on the table, and it never crossed over. Number 22. Salmon croquettes. This one confuses people to this day. Canned pink salmon, mashed with egg, onion, and a little flour or crumbled crackers shaped into patties and fried crisp. Served with grits and biscuits on a Saturday or Sunday morning. The reason was pure economics. In the segregation era, canned salmon was one of the cheapest proteins on the shelf of the small grocery that served the black side of town. Women turned a cheap can into something that tasted like an occasion. The white table down the road, with more money and more access, had no reason to make a tradition out of it. The croquette was born from a tight budget and turned into a beloved tradition that outlived the budget. Number 21. Rice at breakfast. In the Gullah Geechee country of coastal South Carolina and Georgia, a bowl of rice sat on the breakfast table the way toast sat on tables everywhere else. Rice with butter and sugar, rice with fish, rice under gravy. The families who ate it were the descendants of the people whose knowledge of rice farming built the entire low-country rice economy in the first place. That is a fact most breakfast tables never learned. The rice on the plate was not a side dish, it was an inheritance from West Africa that survived on the morning table longer than it survived anywhere else. Keep that rice pot in mind, because number 3 on this list is the reason nobody ever wrote any of this down, and it explains why an inheritance that old could still disappear in a single generation. But first, the meat. Number 20. Hog jowl and fatback versus packaged bacon. On the black southern table, the breakfast meat came off the family hog. Thick slabs of fatback, streak of lean or smoked jowl, sliced by hand and fried until the edges curled. The grease stayed in the pan for the eggs and later for the gravy. The mainstream table bought bacon in a printed package, sliced thin and uniform by a machine in a plant. Same animal, different relationship. One family knew the hog, the other family knew the brand. A man in Marion, Arkansas, said his grandmother could tell which November the meat was killed by the taste of the jowl, and he has never once been able to say that about anything from a store. Number 19. Country ham and red-eye gravy. A slice of salt-cured ham fried hard in a skillet, then the pan swirled with black coffee to lift the browned bits into a thin, dark gravy poured over the ham and the grits. This one lived on both southern tables, black and white. But the black table held on to it longer because the smokehouse held on longer. When the mainstream breakfast moved to Sweet City ham and packaged sausage, the salty, funky, coffee-laced country ham stayed on the tables that still had a smokehouse in the yard. Number 18. Scratch biscuits made by hand with no recipe. Flour, lard, and buttermilk mixed in a wooden bowl by a woman who measured with her palm and knew the dough was right by feel. The biscuits went into the oven of the wood stove and came out tall and brown while the toaster was becoming the centerpiece of the other American breakfast. Sliced white bread in a plastic bag, toasted and buttered, was faster. It was also the end of a skill. A woman in Tupelo made biscuits every morning of her adult life and never once looked at a recipe because there was no recipe. There was only her hands. Number 17. Cane syrup and sopping. On the black southern table, a hot biscuit was torn open and dragged through a puddle of thick cane syrup or sorghum until the plate was clean. Sopping was practically a table manner. The mainstream table spread jam, jelly, or marmalade from a jar with a knife, a habit that came down from an entirely different tradition of fruit preserves. The syrup came from cane grown within a wagon ride of the house. The jelly came from a factory. Both were sweet. Only one of them tasted like the county you lived in. Number 16. Molasses and hoe cakes. Before pancake mix existed, there was the hoe cake, a simple cornmeal batter fried in hot grease into a crisp, flat cake, named for the field tool it was once cooked on. Stacked and covered in molasses, it was breakfast, dessert, and fuel all at once. When the boxed pancake mix took over the American morning in the 20th century, the fluffy white flour pancake with factory syrup replaced the dense corn hoe cake almost everywhere. Almost. In kitchens from Macon to Monroe, the hoe cake held its ground for another 2 generations because the grandmothers refused to let it go. Now the first 10 entries on this list were about what was on the plate. The entries ahead are where the two tables stop being different menus and start being different lives. Number 15. Fried chicken in the morning. Long before any restaurant put chicken and waffles on a menu, fried chicken showed up at black southern breakfasts, especially on Sundays and special mornings, because the chicken was in the yard and the skillet was already hot. The pairing of fried chicken with something sweet from the griddle traveled north during the Great Migration and became famous in Harlem in the 1930s, where late-night musicians ate it in that hour that was too late for dinner and too early for breakfast. The mainstream table never understood chicken before noon. The tradition never needed them to. Number 14. Smothered potatoes and onions. Sliced potatoes and onions cooked low in a covered black skillet with the morning's meat grease until soft, browned, and falling apart. This was the black southern answer to hash browns before hash browns had a name. The difference was the fat and the time. Diner hash browns were shredded and rushed on a flat top. Smothered potatoes took half an hour under a lid and tasted like everything else that had touched that skillet all week. A woman in Shreveport said her mother's breakfast potatoes tasted faintly of Sunday's chicken, and that was not an accident. That was the skillet keeping score. Number 13. Leftovers at breakfast. On the mainstream table, an unwritten rule said breakfast foods were their own category. Eggs, toast, cereal, bacon. Last night's dinner did not belong in the morning. The black Southern kitchen had no such rule, because the kitchen had no room for waste. Cold greens warmed in a skillet next to the eggs, a slice of last night's cornbread fried in butter, a piece of leftover pork chop beside the grits. Breakfast was not a menu. Breakfast was whatever needed eating, made hot. The rule was simple. Nothing that could feed a working body went in the trash. A man in Opelousas, Louisiana, said his mother fried yesterday's cornbread and butter beside the eggs every morning of his childhood, and 70 years later he still cannot sit down to breakfast without checking the icebox first. Number 12. Cornbread and buttermilk in a glass. This one barely counts as a recipe, and it might be the most beloved item on the entire list. Cold cornbread crumbled into a tall glass, covered with cold buttermilk, and eaten with a spoon. Old men ate it as a late breakfast. Grandmothers ate it standing at the counter. It cost nothing, it used up yesterday's bread, and to the people who grew up on it, no dessert on earth has ever replaced it. A man in Greenwood, Mississippi, watched his grandfather eat it from the same tall glass every morning for 30 years. When the old man passed, the glass stayed in the cabinet. Nobody in that family has been able to use it since, and nobody has needed to explain why. The mainstream breakfast table never touched it, never understood it, and honestly, never deserved it. Now, before we get to the top half of this list, notice what every one of these traditions has in common. Somebody took almost nothing and turned it into something worth passing down. A cheap can became Sunday breakfast. One hog fed a family for a year. That mindset built these families, and it builds wealth the exact same way. We wrote it all down in an ebook called The Black Dollar Playbook for anyone who wants to make money, keep money, and pass something down the same way these recipes were passed down. You will find the link in the description below. Now back to the list, because number 11 is the drink your grandmother let you have that your mother never found out about. Number 11, coffee that children drank. In many black Southern homes, coffee was not an adult secret. It was boiled strong on the stove, sometimes stretched with chicory the way Louisiana taught everybody, and children got a splash of it in a cup of warm milk and sugar. Coffee milk. On the mainstream table, coffee percolated in a chrome pot for the adults only, and the children drank orange juice from a carton, because the juice companies had spent millions teaching America that morning meant citrus. One table advertised its way to breakfast, the other one handed it down. Number 10. Breakfast before the sun. Here is the tradition that explains half of this list. In sharecropping and farming families, breakfast was cooked and eaten in the dark at 4:30 or 5 in the morning because the field work started at first light and did not pause until the sun was brutal. That meant breakfast had to be heavy. Meat, bread, grits, syrup, sometimes rice, sometimes fish. Fuel for 8 hours of labor. A woman in Clarksdale, Mississippi, born in 1931, said that in 18 years of living in her mother's house, she never once saw the stove get lit because the lighting happened while the whole house was still asleep. The kitchen was simply warm when she woke, the way the sun was simply up. The mainstream office worker leaving at 8:15 needed nothing like that, and his breakfast shrank to match his commute. The size of the breakfast was never about appetite. It was about what the day was going to take out of you. Number 9. Breakfast as the biggest meal of the day. Follow that same logic one step further. On the old black Southern table, breakfast could out-eat supper. Nutritionists in the cities were writing columns about light, modern breakfast, while women in the Delta were frying pork, baking biscuits, stirring grits, and making gravy before dawn, because a light breakfast in a cotton field was a good way to faint by 10 o'clock. When the families moved north into factory shifts and apartment kitchens, the enormous breakfast was the first casualty. The Sunday table kept it alive. The weekday table let it go. Number 8. The grandmother's kitchen as the gathering room. On the mainstream side, the mid-century home was built with a breakfast nook, a small, clean corner where the family ate quickly and scattered. In the black Southern home, the kitchen was the largest room in the house in every way that mattered. Breakfast happened around the grandmother, at her table, in her heat, with the radio low and the screen door open. Children learned to cook there without ever being taught. just by standing close. A man raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina, said he never took a cooking lesson in his life, but he can make his grandmother's rice and gravy from memory because he spent 10 years of Saturday mornings standing at her elbow close enough to feel the heat off the skillet. The nook was furniture. The kitchen was an institution. Number 7. Sunday breakfast before church. Saturday's breakfast fed the body. Sunday's breakfast fed something else. On Sunday morning, the table got the salmon croquettes, the fried chicken, the rice and gravy, the good syrup, all of it timed to end exactly when the family had to be dressed and out the door for a service that might run 3 hours. A woman in Macon, Georgia, had the croquettes, the grits, and the biscuits on the table by 7:30 every Sunday of her adult life because the service started at 9 and her preacher was not known for brevity. The mainstream Sunday drifted a different direction across the 20th century toward the late restaurant brunch, eggs Benedict and mimosas at 11. One tradition ate big and then went to give thanks. The other slept in and called the meal by a French-sounding name. Number 6. The syrup can and the lard bucket on the table. Walk into an old photograph of a black Southern breakfast, and you will see the containers themselves. The gallon can of cane syrup with a spoon resting in the groove of the lid. The lard bucket by the stove. The cast iron skillet going straight from the fire to a folded towel on the table. Nothing was transferred into serving dishes because the containers were not something to hide. On the mainstream table, the same decades brought matching dish sets, butter dishes, and syrup dispensers shaped like little glass pitchers. One table dressed the food up. The other table let the food be exactly what it was. And if that habit of making every single thing count is the one you want to pass down to your own family, the Black Dollar Playbook is still in the description. Number 5. Gravy as a food group, not a topping. A food group. Flour browned in meat grease, thinned with milk or water, poured over biscuits, rice, grits, or potatoes. Sawmill gravy, tomato gravy, giblet gravy at breakfast. Gravy existed to multiply. It took one pan of meat drippings and stretched it across 10 biscuits and 6 people. White Southern tables love their gravy too, and they will tell you so, but the black table elevated stretch cooking into an art form because the stakes were higher. When the meat was small, the gravy made sure nobody at the table could tell. Number 4. What both tables shared. Here is the part of this story that the title of this video does not tell you. Go far enough back into the rural South, and the poor white family's breakfast and the black family's breakfast down the road looked almost like the same meal. Biscuits, grits, fatback, syrup, gravy. Same crops, same climate, same hunger. The food crossed the color line in both directions for 300 years, mostly carried by the black cooks who worked in white kitchens and seasoned an entire region's palate. The two tables were separated by law and by wage, but the skillets were speaking the same language the whole time. The real difference was never the recipe. Hold that thought, because it is exactly where this list is headed. Number 3. The recipes were never written down. This is the reason this video is called what it is called. Nobody explains these traditions because the tradition itself was the explanation. The knowledge passed hand to hand, in the kitchen, before dawn, from a grandmother to whichever child was standing closest. A pinch, a feel, a sound the biscuit made when it was done. The mainstream breakfast got written into cookbooks, printed on boxes, and broadcast in commercials, so it got explained a million times. The black breakfast was taught in person or not at all. A grandmother in Darlington, South Carolina, made biscuits every morning with her daughter standing at the bowl. The daughter moved to Cleveland in 1953 and made biscuits alone in an apartment kitchen before a factory shift because there was no one home to stand and watch. Her daughter, raised in that apartment, buys her biscuits in a cardboard tube. 3 generations. The first learned by watching. The second remembered by doing. The third never saw it happen. When the Great Migration and the working double shift emptied that pre-dawn kitchen, the classroom closed. The food survived in memory. The method survived only where somebody had been watching. Number 2. What did not change? 2 things held on no matter what city the family landed in. The Sunday breakfast stayed big, stayed hot, and stayed non-negotiable because Sunday was the one morning the working week could not touch. and the grits stayed. From Charleston to Chicago to Los Angeles, the pot of grits crossed every state line the train ever crossed, because grits needed no garden, no smokehouse, and no creek. Just a pot, a flame, and somebody who remembered. Every other tradition on this list bent to the new city. These two did not bend for anybody. Number one, it was never about the food. Every single entry on this list traces back to one thing: the day that was waiting outside the kitchen door. One table was built by people who worked the land from first light, so the day demanded a breakfast before dawn, heavy enough to carry a body through a field. It demanded the hog, the mill, the creek, and the cane, so the morning tasted like the county. The other table was built around a different day: office hours, factory whistles, advertising, and the grocery shelf, so breakfast got faster, colder, and smaller, and the morning tasted like the brand. Neither table was wrong. Both tables were honest. Each one was a perfect record of the day that sat down at it. The black breakfast was heavier because the day was heavier. It was more resourceful because the wage was smaller. It was passed down by hand because the world was not writing it down for them. So the next time somebody asks why Grandma fried fish at 6 in the morning, or why there was rice on the breakfast table, or why the biscuits never came from a can, you can give them the real answer. It was not a preference. It was a record. Breakfast was the first page of the day, and those two Americas were living two very different days. Drop your family's breakfast tradition in the comments. Was it the salmon croquettes on Sunday, the fish and grits, the cornbread crumbled in buttermilk, the coffee milk your grandmother let you drink when your mother was not looking, or the biscuits made by a pair of hands that never once needed a recipe? Or was it something else? A morning dish that only ever existed in one kitchen in one town, that nobody in the family has tasted since the last person who knew it stopped cooking? Because this list is 25 entries long, but the real list is as long as every kitchen that ever lit a stove in the dark. And if this video puts you back at that table for a few minutes, hit subscribe, because we are keeping these memories where they belong, out loud.